We are waiting for one of panelists, but we could start. To introduce myself, my name is Kalin Slavov. I'm the ID of Transparency International Bulgaria. I will introduce other panelists. Boni Bonev is the chairman of the Bulgarian-Swiss Chamber of Commerce and also member of directors of Nestle Bulgaria. Next to me is Andrija Tomovic. He has served as the general manager in Novartis, Bulgaria since 2021. And the newcomer is Ivan Mihaylov. He's the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Bulgaria. And he held different positions in private sector. Maybe the Minister of Finance don't need a presentation, you know him. I talked with panelists in this panel, and we had the idea that I encourage them, if they want, to use also Bulgarian. If you bring know-how in some country, it's a good idea to speak the language of this country. It's something that good writers do. They speak the language of the auditorium. Who will intervene first? Maybe Mr. Vassilev?
Maybe last. We hear the business first.
Okay, the business first. Andrija, maybe you?
Sure. So yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me here today. This is a very important topic. Ethics and integrity at Novartis, we believe, is the job of everybody, no matter in which functions we belong to, no matter which seniority level we have. It's a formally part of our job profile, but it's also part of our DNA, as you like to say. We have ethics, compliance and risk management function at the global level, and we have an officer here in Bulgaria as well. And the whole work around these topics is organized around three strategic pillars, so to say. The first one is ethics, the second one compliance management, and the third one risk management. When we are talking about ethics, apart from being job of everybody, as I said, the foundation of the ethical elements is stated in our code of ethics that has been co-created with our associates for our associates. So it's a principle-based, because we don't believe that we can predict each and every situation in which our associates could end up to make some ethical or difficult decisions. It's better to bring them principles that they can ask certain questions and in that way probe themselves when they are making decisions. To give you a flavor, something that I personally like with my team is usually when we are making decisions, we try, let's imagine that journalists are in the room and mainstreaming us in a public domain. Or if we have a patients in the room listening to what we discuss, would we stand up? Would we defend and feel comfortable with everything what we are talking about? Of course, apart from that, we have a compliance management system that includes scrutiny and control of the processes at Novartis with a local compliance manager in Bulgaria as well. We have a lot of trainings, also onboarding programs. All our development program includes components on the ethics and the integrity as a part of creating leaders at Novartis and in pharma industry, I would say, in general. And risk management process is also done bottom-up, so to say. So each team, each function is sitting together, discussing actually what are the key risks, putting them on the two-dimensional metrics, the impact and likelihood, and categorizing them based whether they are strategic, operational, emerging one, and owning that risk plan and mitigation plan as well in alignment with strategic priorities. So each team does that, so then we can compile them at the country level, at the region level, global, and one Novartis globally. But I would say all those scrutiny systems are important to enable people to behave ethically when someone is watching. But our ultimate goal is actually to behave ethically even when nobody is watching, in the context of prevention discussed this morning. So people are foundation of every business. same at Novartis. And apart from doing rigorous background check, reference checking when we are hiring people, probing on the ethical questions on the interview, we still know that good people could bring themselves in some ethical dilemma. It happens. It happens to all of us that we are finding ourselves in the moment that requires, support. And that kind of culture is extremely important to build this psychological safety, to bring those simple framework that are based on behavioral science and the data science and decision-making science, how to do the right thing with every decision, no matter how small or big it is, for the patients, for the customers, for external stakeholders, community, and for our business as well. And that's our ultimate goal, to enable the associates to behave ethically even when nobody is watching and where there are no scrutiny systems, although they will continue to exist. Thank you.
Thank you. The point of view of business is always practical, with mechanism to implement such difficult things like integrity. Boni, maybe it's you too.
Thank you very much, Kalin. Hello to everyone. Thank you very much also for inviting me and for these very interesting panels that we assisted. We have a lot to consider and to think about of how we can improve our actions here in Bulgaria. I would like also to compliment Minister Vassilev and his colleagues, because what they said from the beginning to date was absolutely true. We fully agree. It is not going to be an easy path, but having heard what you say, how you intend to approach the issues, we very much believe that this is the right way, and you can count on us at all times. Integrity, what is behind this word? I don't know if any one of you has heard about this Center for Strategic Business Integrity. It is some center that was created in Maryland. It was created by a certain John Verna. A few years ago, he presented exactly in this room, so I and the room know him, and we know the center from what I see. But anyhow, this is the guy who found out all the wrongdoings of Enron, Orange County, etc. And today he is developing this center to teach leadership, integrity, and actually how to deal with fraud, how to eliminate fraud in business. He said that the tone should be given from the top, and I fully agree. And the same happened this morning from what was said by the minister. And the tone should be something very simple. And it sounded like this: I will not lie, cheat, or steal. And I will not tolerate this in others. And us as BSCC, as Bulgarian-Swiss Chamber of Commerce, we add to this: I will be ethical. I will not do something that is only legal. I will do it only if it is moral. And this is how we act in our chamber, and this is what allows us to speak in forums like this one today. Because we are very selective with regard to members. We ask also our members, when they change their shareholders, to inform us. We have not accepted a number of candidates. We work in a very aligned way with our embassy. Our embassy, the Swiss embassy, is also ex officio member of the board, and this helps a lot to work together in the right direction. We are also members of the UN Global Compact since 2016, which is another, let's say, guideline that we follow and that helps. And since recently, we have been founding members of the Business Integrity Club that we created together with Kalin, Transparency International Bulgaria. We think that all this helps a lot to really work together and to achieve sustainable outcomes, because we believe that integrity is exactly the opposite of corruption. If there is integrity, there is no way for corruption to exist in a place. Thank you. This would be.
Thank you. The lesson is that the integrity that we have in ourselves is not compliance with law. It's away. It's further away.
Yes, I have three. Thank you very much. Good morning, Ivan Mihaylov, the American Chamber of Commerce. I will continue where Mr. Bonev stopped. In the context of American Chamber of Commerce in Bulgaria, integrity is part of our life on a daily basis. We need, of course, to always improve. But for us, it's really, really key of what we are preaching to our members and to the society is actually to be equal to what we are doing. Integrity has many faces, and on words we are all very for the integrity, and we are fighting for this integrity, but it's all about the actions at the end of the day. And that's why the American Chamber, but together with our partners from other chambers like the Swiss one, for example, German Chamber as well, and others, we are really, really driving and reinforcing the integrity among our members, among our the businesses that we are representing, and this is giving us, of course, ability to demand this from the others. The chambers must be always a clear field where the companies feel comfortable, the companies which are sharing these integrity values, and I'm very happy that in the American Chamber of Commerce this is the case. There are many who, of course, would like to present themselves as compliant to the integrity, but as we're sharing the similar mechanisms as Mr. Bonev described, working closely with the American Embassy in our case and our sources of information, so far I'm really happy that we are good in keeping this integrity environment of high integrity. And talking about the demand, yes, we are expecting the others to be, by others I mean our partnering organizations, institutions, and I feel very comfortable in that Minister Vassilev is here with us because he mentioned the fight is just beginning. Of course, we are supporting this fight because of these values, and we will continue because this is the responsibility of our chambers. I will pause here because the rest was said already.
Thank you. I guess English is the language of the room, so I'll stick to English. I just looked at the name of the panel, Private Sector as a Driver for Collective Action. And I think we talk about integrity. I'm always reminded of a study that was done by a famous psychologist on people's proclivity to cheat. And it turned out that it's not a 0-1. Everybody cheats. It's a question of how strong the incentive is. And people that we say are moral and they don't cheat and then don't lie, they are a lot more resistant to pressure. But ultimately, everybody breaks under pressure. Whether that's threatening their family, whether that's threatening them physically, but there is some point at which just about everybody breaks. And I think when we talk about the private sector and we talk about integrity, I'm going to take the pharma industry as an example, not because we have a representative here, but we all know of the practice that pharma companies used to pay doctors to prescribe their drugs in order to gain market share. Now it's a little bit more subtle, where they take doctors on extended vacations, or training seminars, or whatever it is, right? But all of it is a way to influence the gatekeeper to prescribe a drug. Now, is that corruption? It's legal in most countries. Does it change doctors' behavior, maybe for some doctors. Maybe some doctors are very resistant and they would never actually change their behavior due to those kinds of incentives. But fundamentally, when a doctor writes a drug on the prescription, he was forced to tell the patient, and I take 50 euros for making that prescription, there would be a different conversation between the doctor and the patient. And the level of trust between the doctor and the patient would probably be eroded, because the patient has no idea that the doctor has an incentive to prescribe that specific drug. And that's the case with a lot of other business practices. Usually, I mean, we talk about the Enrons of the world, right? Or the Morgan Stanleys of the world, but we basically, every time there is pressure to gain market share and to do business, you engage in practices, and some of them might be classified as corruption by the penalty code, and some of them might not be classified as corruption, but fundamentally it's trying to influence somebody's behavior using private incentives to make them do something that affects other people's well-being, not their own. And I think where we can see the private sector as a driver for reducing those practices is working together with government to regulate those practices away. Because if one company does it, the other company has to do it, otherwise it will die. Those are the rules of the market. Where the government can help in that process is really work with the companies to regulate that process and make sure that either it doesn't happen, or if it happens, it's clearly messaged to the people affected by the decisions. In that way, you make the entire business environment fair and transparent. I mean, same thing, all the fight we had over labeling of food products. The simple label of green, yellow, red was killed by the companies producing food, because they didn't want to clearly see that they're using substances in the food production that are immediately going to label their food red, because it's good for profits. And if the customer sees a red label, maybe they'll have to change the recipe and do something differently. So now instead we have all of these long labels, which nobody really reads, and nobody really understands. And we are down to no sugar added on water bottles, right, as a marketing trick, instead of having real regulatory environment. So when we talk about corruption, when we talk about transparency, we also need to be very cognizant of the role that lobbying plays in making sure that there is no corruption and no transparency, because that helps certain business practices and certain companies. And I think it's a two-way street. In a way, companies can help the government by shining light on where there are discriminatory practices which favor one company over another. But I think also vice versa, government can serve as a tool to help companies make sure that the market is transparent and clear and fair for everybody. And that no cartels exist. And that's the harder task in many ways. And I was saving that for my closing remarks. Maybe I'll expand a little bit more, but when we had the discussion around sanctions because of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, some of the toughest sanctions passed, including some of the sanctions that were related to freezing the assets of the Russian central bank, some pretty potent sanctions passed. You know what was the one sanction that didn't pass? which we pushed for officially several times, and it kind of fell on deaf ears. Putting sanctions on lawyers, accountants, and registrars that service or sanction avoidance and that obfuscate and hide true ultimate beneficial owners. Because if you slap sanctions on those entities, the lawyers, the accountants, and the registrars, suddenly everything would be transparent. You'll know the ultimate beneficial owners. You won't have offshore accounts, you won't have offshore companies with unknown UBOs. And all the lawyers and accountants that are necessary for this shadow economy and corruption economy to exist, if they themselves would be put under sanctions, that would serve as a very fast way to kill that entire ecosystem, or at least wound it mortally. Shall we say that this is an idea that's an anathema? And I think we can all understand why. Because if we do that, if everything becomes transparent, we are going to see some pretty ugly truths in some pretty advanced economies.
Thank you, dear Minister. You're completely right that the business based on integrity generates trust. For the business, trust means more clients and good partners, and that are the thing that generates profit. So that you can transform the trust in money. That's the major issue. Do we have some questions to our participants? No? Maybe you're a little bit tired. For closing this session, I will tell something. Here's a question. Okay. Here we have my.
I promise you don't have to hear me speak, but you have to listen to me again. No, I just was curious, maybe one more time from the private sector participants in particular, what would you need in order to be willing to engage constructively with government? Because it sounds a little bit too perfect. At the same time, we really know it's not perfect. So what do you need from government, from whatever, to be willing to engage in some kind of dialogue, some kind of even minuscule collective action? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Exactly this discussion, openly talking about difficult topics, openly talking about everything that is crossing our mind and hearts, you know. So it is very important to talk about this topic really transparently. So to address the point from the Mr. Minister, you know, not only that pharma industry, that each company has the code of ethics on its own, we have also industry association and the code of ethics for the pharma industry, even here in Bulgaria, that actually control and scrutinize us against the practice that you just mentioned. And we try to work in alignment with the government to enforce those, not only to be recommendations or guidelines by the industry standards, but also to be part of the law, because this is the way to go, because this is not a good practice. We don't believe that the short-term gain can outweigh any long-term benefits or any trust that we should build with the community, with the society. You know, so to address that particular problem, how I am talking that with my team, you know, we are all patients, or will be unfortunately sooner or later patients. We have people around us suffering from very severe disease. Imagine that patient, that we are part of some corrupted system that is bringing us in the position not to get the best treatment that we need to cure or to deal with our difficulties. It's awful, it's terrible. And I think when you put yourself from that principle base. As a human being, you would never like to be part of that. For none of market share or for any commercial benefits in the short term cannot outweigh your integrity in the long term. You want to stand up tomorrow in front of your kids, in front of your family, in front of your friends, and to know that you're doing the right thing. Curing and dealing with patients, it's a very sensitive topic that requires scrutiny, and I am for that. I am for discussion with industry, with the government, to enforce, to put the mechanism that will scrutinize it more, but also, as I said, to going even above and beyond that, to have the ethical compass deeply in your DNA and ask those questions. How would you feel to be part of the system that your doctor is prescribing something that is not the best treatment for you in the given moment, or your mother or your father or your kids? That's actually, you know, and when you ask people who work in the sector, healthcare, those kind of questions, they think, they outweigh. And even those who might have some dilemmas, for no matter what in the short term, they choose the right thing. I believe that people are fundamentally good. They have some kind of confusions, pressure, as you said, but there is nothing that can outweigh the choosing the right thing to do. We can reinforce it together with the government, together with making it official laws, to bringing collective actions, to bringing different working group, consortium that will scrutinize that, but it's also going even above and beyond that. Hope I'm answering the question. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, we do. Yes. Dear Ambassador, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. We just heard now, on the one hand, this kind of zero tolerance approach. On the other hand, I heard sometimes also consistency problem, because you have other ways of not being fully actually doing what you actually are saying. In the panel before, we heard about bringing corruption down to a socially tolerable level, which means not zero, something somewhere on the way as part of the process. And we do agree that this takes time, and you have to start somewhere, and you have to have perseverance and all these things. I'm just wondering, how about the communication? How do you communicate that to the stakeholders, to the outside world, that on the one hand you want to be tough on everybody, and on the other hand you have to be pragmatic somehow, because it takes time to go forward? Maybe some comments from the panel. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll take this one first. I do believe in zero tolerance, because the moment even the smallest bribe happens, the person who took it and the person who gave it are both dependent. They do not have free will anymore. One can influence the other. And if you don't have free will, it just keeps going. And that's where the zero tolerance comes. If at the individual level, there is no such thing as small corruption. I'll give you an example. Even if you were stopped and you gave a bribe to a cop on the street, there is a little secret. Somebody can find it out, and then it's all gone. And that's where the zero tolerance comes into place. I firmly believe that what was said by Andrija, that you have to have it in you to withstand that. Where I think the pragmatism comes is how much and how quickly can you change the environment so that most people can withstand the pressure and have zero tolerance to corruption. And there we face the constraints of the real world, and from the lobbying efforts to the organized crime to the existing secrets because of past corrupt practices, to the willingness of society to fight that practice and the mindset. and these are all real constraints. I think when we were discussing the public procurement law, I gave you an example. I mean, we bumped into real constraints and two exceptions stayed. We heard good words about the whistleblower law. There we bumped into a constraint that anything prior to 2021 is not subject to the whistleblower law. So you're protected as long as you tell about behavior after 2021, and we all know why that year was introduced in the law. Right? And that's another real constraint. Doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean if you know something happened before 2021 and you're willing to talk about it, you shouldn't, or that we'll tolerate that everything before that is hidden, but the legal protection could only be extended to that point because that's the political reality in Bulgaria today based on the voters' preference. And that's where I think you have zero tolerance at a personal level, and you request that of every member of your team, and you don't tolerate any corruption. But then we also have to be very pragmatic about the world in which we live, and there are limits to how far you can impose the zero tolerance and how quickly you can move society along.
Did someone want to add something?
Do you mind if I say something? Well, I thank you for the question and for your question and also for your comments. I very much believe that what we are ending up with is really collective action that is needed. For the past number of years, together with our American colleagues and many other chambers, we have been always trying to send letters in support of the judicial reform, try to make discussions with government officials, ministers of justice, etc. And we always met some understanding at the moment, but then nothing followed after these meetings. And this is why I was very happy to hear what you said just a few minutes ago, that you would like to start such a discussion. And I very much believe that if we create some kind of a platform for collective action, whereby institutions, organizations, businesses that have good track record with regard to integrity meet and discuss of what can be done, then we may agree, I say it with sadness, that we will not be able to go back before 21, but at least we'll be able to talk about what is from now on, how the ministry, your ministry, other ministries, state institutions will have also their codes of ethic, will have their zero tolerance, just like we do, and we will be able to start building something for the future. This is my, let's say, conclusion of all the discussions and what was said today. We really have to start something that becomes sustainable. A cooperation that has a vision, a mission, an action plan, and it implements it. Thank you.
Other colleagues?
Now it's hard to speak after Boni, but he really illustrated what is our aim. But to your question, Ambassador, the collective action so far from the business exists many years, and we were doing many cases. Boni mentioned, we can speak all day about them. What we would like now to change, and the direction that we're looking forward, is to eliminate patterns. Because we do collective action, we solve one problem, and then we see the same thing happening again for another case. And the one thing that, at least in the American chamber, with our structures inside, rule of law committees, etc., I'll not go in these details, we're now looking towards the patterns. And they are existing, because we need to admit, we'll do this platform, we'll never get the corruption down to zero. It will always exist on certain level, even in a minimum, hopefully at the minimum. But we need to to kill the patterns now and to avoid them in the future. That's why it's called pattern. So if we do this, and this is our aim, I think we'll make a really tangible step forwards. Thank you.
And if I may add on the beautiful question is actually from the private sector, at least it's about increasing transparency, publishing more on those KPIs around bribery and anti-corruption. They are not yet mandatory, I think, coming from the government, but for example, we are taking part voluntarily in several initiatives at the global level, like a United Nations Global Compact, that we regularly report on the 10 principles against corruption in our annual report, so to say, in our website, or we are part of the Norgest Bank Investment Management Working Stream that is talking about very specific KPIs around anti-corruption and bribery, and we are publishing them. Those are KPI regularly published, and that trend is becoming more and more prevalent. And I think in the context of so-called stakeholders capitalism and ECG, it's going to become even mandatory or common practice, no matter, I believe it will come from the government on one side, but will also establish itself as a best practice to talk about ECG, the KPIs on a regular basis. And we work closely with the Basel Institute on Governance on all those topics, also on the beautiful project Human Rights and Anti-Bribery Synergies, that it's important to establish those 10 standards. And I'm happy when innovations sometimes go even faster than administration, especially around those integrity topics that are very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Maybe here?
Благодаря. Аз съм франкофон и ми е лош английски и ще говоря на български. Господин министър, вие сте представител на правителството, имате чрез него право на законодателна инициатива и приемете моите думи като препоръка, не като въпрос. Два закона липсват, за да се подобри прозрачността и респективно да се намали корупцията. Единият бе приет преди 10 години, закон за публично-частното партньорство. Аз с един колектив от юристи, аз не се представих, Йосиф Аврамов, финансист съм и преподавам финанси и банково дело в Нов Български университет. Имам и някои бизнес активности, член съм и на управителния съвет на Българската търговско-промишлена палата. Тогава се направи закон, прие се и трябваше Министерство на финансите по времето на вашия предшественик Петър Чубанов да изготви една методика, която бе готова, но правителството падна и не влезе в сила. Следващото правителство отмени закона и част от него вкара в закона за концесиите. Моето мнение в разговори с бизнес, с научните среди е, че е необходим такъв закон, така че моля да го имате предвид в законодателната програма, може би за следващата година. А вторият закон, който изобщо не е приеман у нас, е закон за лобизма. Преди 6-7 години, като представител на Търговската палата, бях поканен в Комисията по корупцията в парламента на едно закрито заседание. Тогава се гледаше закон за лобизма. И някак си моето присъствие бе нежелано, тъй като всички депутати гласуваха дали да остана в залата или не. Оставиха ме, разбира се, но закона не беше добър особено. Все пак добре е да се намери и да се преработи. Благодаря ви.
Благодаря. Ще ви отговоря директно и по двата въпроса. Закона за лобизма е включен в част от реформите по плана за възстановяване и устойчивост, тъй като абсолютно е необходим закон за лобизма в България, който да регулира тази дейност. Иначе влизаме в нерегулираните практики и там зоната е не сива, ами направо черна. Що се отнася до закона за публично-частно партньорство, аз съм съгласен с вас и той трябва да бъде, според мен, направен така, че да работи в истинския смисъл, когато риска и печалбата от дадено партньорство всъщност са споделени по правилния начин. Който носи риска, той получава печалбата.
Само ако позволите да добавя, тъй като сме членове на работната група в Министерство на правосъдието, етапа на концепция на закона е вече завършен и ще почне да се работи върху конкретни текстове. Да, закона за лобизма. Ще почне да се работят конкретни текстове. Надявам се, като добра законодателна практика, той да извърви целият дължим път, включително и обществените обсъждания, включително добра финансова обосновка и така нататък. Защото напоследък качеството на законодателството не само създава притеснение, но направо плаши. Най-вече тогава, когато се използват така наречената бърза пътека или внасянето от депутати. Мисля, че имахте въпрос. You had a question, yeah.
Well, it's a question to Minister Vassilev. Minister, I appreciate very much that you mentioned those that we call the enablers within Transparency International. So those lawyers, accountants, notaries, also we had the bankers who may enable corruption deeds. What do you suggest that the government could do concretely for these enablers to report corruption deeds instead of enabling them? Thank you.
I would start with company registry reform worldwide and make all company registries public. That includes the US, by the way. A lot of companies registered in certain states in the US, like Nevada, I think Delaware still, registries are not public. You don't know who the ultimate beneficial owners are. So that's one piece. And in a sense, we have the international muscle to do it. If Europe says companies registered in zones where the registry is not public cannot do business in Europe, I'm pretty certain either companies would stop being registered there or those zones would become with public registers. That's one piece, and that I think would go a long way towards being able to trace the ownership structures. And also, quite frankly, we saw things like Panama Papers coming out, and all of this was a non-public registry becoming public, and the amount of insight it gave into the political and business dealings in a lot of countries. So imagine if all of those registries became public. Then it's going to be very hard to hide money. If you receive money due to corruption, it's much harder. That I think would be a huge reform, but very necessary one. The other thing, I think in the banking sector, we went a little bit further. There are the PEP regulations and sanctions, and there a lot of things have moved along. I think same thing, similar to banks, if law companies or accountants work with PEP, maybe they should report that and make sure that's all above board, at the very least transparent. Right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Now, of course, there is a question of trust when you work with lawyers and with accountants, where there is trust towards the client that works with them. Similar to when lawyers work with criminals, right? I mean, what they learn, unless it's in many jurisdictions an ongoing crime, they don't have an ethical responsibility to report past crimes. But I think that we should we should put some regulation around ongoing crimes for sure. And the other thing is we should be a lot more aggressive in the professional bodies at expelling people who have actually helped certain transactions. Because when we talk about Enron, or when we talk about a lot of the Panama Papers, I mean, how many of those lawyers, accounting firms that were servicing some of those transactions knowingly actually were prosecuted or at least professionally expelled from the bar associations or the professional bodies of the accountants. And last but not least, there are certain practices that are actually disallowed in many countries, like bearer bonds, bearer share certificates, options to purchase against a nominal price. So the real owner is hidden and you have a nominal owner, nominal director. I think all of these practices can be examined, and I'm pretty certain with all the knowledge and know-how that exists in OECD, Transparency International, the Basel Institute, it'd probably take a couple of months to come up with pretty stringent regulations around that, as long as there's political will for that to actually happen. And I can tell you on the Bulgarian government in its current form, there is political will, and we've been raising those questions in Europe.
Mr. Ambassador.
I think I feel obliged to respond to François as now a lawyer. First, personally, but this is my real, I don't like at all the term enablers. I prefer much better the term gatekeepers, because the term enabler seems to suggest that all lawyers are enablers, which is a bit excessive. I think the big issue is what you meant, I mean, and it's a bit, it's a subject, but it's a bit another subject, but it's an interesting one. The difficulty is what you mentioned, Minister. And I think one of the difficulty is to distinguish in the role of a lawyer in particular in terms of his duty to the client irrespective of what the client has done, because all the criminals have the right to be defended, and his advisory role. And I think the difficulty is where you draw the line between representing and defending a client and advising a client in anticipation, indeed, of what the client has the intention to do or not. But put aside this, in a sense, this is an interesting topic, because linked to that, I don't know, in terms of collective action, I don't know if you're aware of a very interesting collective action that took place in Slovakia a few years ago in terms of the public registry and the role of lawyers. And one of the lessons, and we can share this separately, because I think there is something interesting for you too. But one of the lessons that we can draw here, in terms of our gathering, is that I truly believe that enablers or gatekeepers, whatever we want to call them, have not been involved enough in collective action efforts in the part. They should be part of the collective action, because they are part of the problem, but they are also part of the solution.
Maybe we have one more question here.
Hello, dear panelists, Minister Vassilev, Your Excellencies present here. I really enjoyed this session, and I really enjoyed, and I was focused on the presentation of Minister Vassilev. I have a question, maybe a little bit more philosophical, but it's consider this: where do you draw the line? Where do because we're all for transparency, sounds great. And we're all for killing the corruption. It's absolutely, I think this is the biggest evil that ruined our 30 years of my life and of the life of our country, and it needs to stop. But do you draw a line somewhere between this collective action, this transparency, and the value of the transparency, and a state or a country which is involved in the life of the person, which has information about everything, which imposes repression, I would say repression or sanctions, not only to the people who commit the crime, but also to the person who do not report, to the persons who are involved somehow, like whistleblowers or accountants subject to DAC 6, to the European directives. So where is the line? Where do we defend our basic rights, our freedoms that we have left, and actually the intervention of the state of every part of our life? And should we also, the last one, should we also focus on motivation and not on repression and sanctions? Because by motivation we can include the lawyers, the accountants, and every person in this society, including the state, who should be also transparent when spends money and does the public spending. So instead of drafting laws, and I see the last few years, we are subjects, we are addressees to laws who impose actions for sanctions for everything, for not reporting, for not saying something, for not filing a report, for not filing a declaration. So I would really like to hear your opinion.
Okay. Well, if I can answer in one sentence, and then I'll give you a few examples. We draw the line where the crime starts.
Where
the crime starts. And let me give an example. Me as a public official, right, I have voluntarily put myself into that position. So there is a very intrusive declaration that I fill out starting my job, ending my job, and then every 6 months about all my assets, all my income, and that of my family, by law. And that's true of good number of public officials. Now, if you, as a professional, know that the declaration I filled is incomplete or wrong, right? Because you work with me and you help me hide assets, or you help me organize a company to hide assets. You're an accomplice to a crime, right? And you very clearly know that I lied in my declaration, and quite frankly, I would expect you as a professional to have all the whistleblower protections and everything else, but to actually come up and say, I know this declaration is fake. This piece is missing. This person is the UBO of that company, which is not listed on the declaration. And I think that's fair to ask of the profession. In terms of benefits, you know, we've been trying for a number of years, including right now, to introduce what is a practice in the US, in the UK, in France, in a number of economies, which is if you help uncover a large tax crime, you actually get 10% of the actual collections that the revenue service does, right? And this is for crimes above a certain size. It's not for the run-of-the-mill mom and pop. This store doesn't use a cash register kind of things, right? We're talking about big tax crime. Usually large tax crimes are discovered that way, through internal information. That's how it works. And that has been stopped by Parliament. And this time around it will again be stopped by Parliament, or at least that's what everybody says, which doesn't mean we will withdraw it, we'll introduce it. Parliament would reject it. It's their right to reject it. But that's a way of going with incentives for large stuff. It's not the run-of-the-mill, two neighbors quarreling kind of things. But if you uncover large tax crime or tax scheme in a large corporation, right? And let's say you're an accountant or a junior accountant, and we're talking tens of millions or hundreds of millions of euros. You're basically unemployable for the rest of your life. Which means that you need to have that incentive when the tax office collects, because you've made a moral choice, but you've essentially killed your professional reputation in many ways. That's where kind of sharing and having an open discussion about those things, I think, is important, because otherwise we try to put labels on things like, for example, what they were saying about that specific tax incentive is that it's snooping on other people. Well, it's not. Where we draw the line, I think, is pretty interesting. I think for people not involved in a position of power and working with public resources, nobody's really monitoring that and nobody's interested in that, because what you do with your own private money is your own private business. I think if you touch public money, you should be subjected to all the scrutiny in the world. And that's true of large corporates as well, that have the power to influence the market, influence regulations, and that spend public money in many ways. Because, for example, if we take large corporations, not to pick on you, but a good chunk of your revenue in Bulgaria comes from the national health insurance scheme, right? So there, obviously, we are spending public money, and it's and that's where you should extend the regulatory oversight. If it's two companies selling to each other without, in a way, touching public resource, then that's a normal business. Truth of the matter is, with technology these days, what we see is that privacy is an illusion. It doesn't mean we shouldn't keep it, but fundamentally, it's an illusion. But as I said, my question is, your privacy stops where the crime starts.
Obviously, Minister Vassilev attracts all the questions in the room, almost all. Още един въпрос имате.
My name is Mihaylov, and I just want to make a small comment. Obviously, the discussion is coming to the moment when it starts. The trust and the transparency and the integrity. These are the values-based which are in the fundamental for the collective actions. And that's a risk also. This is a possibility and a risk. Risk is because the collective business integrity, which is represented by the business society, meets the natural instinct of the government to regulate everything, which they don't know. And this is something, a balance you need to find, and I think this discussion brings you really to this balance that suppress the reaction of the government to regulate everything and to give the opportunity to the business to express their integrity and to develop trust between them. So I think this discussion should be going more in this discussion, how the government could provide more incentives to the business to express their integrity instead of just trying to regulating, because it's not possible everything to be regulated. Over-regulation means that you open another possibility for avoidance of this mechanism. And you as a lawyer, me as a lawyer, know very well that this is possible. But from the other hand, if the government opens a possibility, the business to prove their integrity, their ethical standards, then you can start the first step in fighting the corruption even and really develop the collective action. This is a small comment, but I think that this is also from what I heard from all the panelists and from the people participating in this discussion. Thank you. And I wish that the government will take this as an advice to think more about the incentives.
Yes, of course, the government can put a kind of regulation that stimulates the business to be certified in business integrity practices and the mechanism that implements, like a part of the collective action. This is a tool of the collective action, actually.
Yeah, no, if I can, I've been speaking too much, but if I can just address that one last comment. I usually warn 3 times before we put regulation forward, but the 3rd time we put the regulation forward. And that's not a joke. I mean, we do talk to businesses. When we see something that doesn't seem right, and I can give specific examples in something doesn't seem right from a public interest perspective. For example, businesses use aggressive transfer pricing to avoid even our low 10% tax. Okay, so we warn once, we warn twice. The third time we present them with draft regulation, which is not promulgated. And if we don't see change in the practice, we promulgate the draft regulation. That's how I think the process should work, right? You give the business a chance to rectify the practice without regulating it. And then you bring everybody around the table. And then either the business has the strength to self-regulate and make sure that they stop that sort of practice, or they don't. And if they don't, then the government needs to act. And again, it's only large enough issues that, as you know, there are 100 problems at any point in time. So in order to get to that we need to regulate that piece, either it comes from the business itself or it's pretty large and pretty impactful. For us to really start tackling it.
Maybe there are no more questions. So without closing remarks, we end this session. Благодарим на нашите панелисти за добавената стойност към днешното събиране и за хубавия диалог с публиката.